welcome your 2023 Strategic Planning Committee Chair, Michelle Walker.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our Emerging Issues Forum. While today's topic is not necessarily new, it is very timely as April is celebrated as Fair Housing Month. With that in mind, we are excited to hear about the latest work being done at the National Association of Realtors and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD, to expand home buying opportunities and preserve home ownership. With us today on the left, my left, is Brian Green, Vice President of Policy Advocacy for NAR out of the Washington, D.C. office, and Ulysses Deke Claiborne, who serves as the Regional Administrator for HUD, serving Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and 9 tribal nations. Before I turn it over to them, I want to share a bit more about their respective backgrounds. As Vice President of Policy Advocacy, Brian oversees all legislative and regulatory advocacy on behalf of the National Association of Realtors. However, his first role with the association was vitally important, serving as NAR's first Director of Fair Housing Policy. Before joining the Realtor Association, Brian worked for HUD, serving as the Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity General Deputy Assistant Secretary, enforcing the nation's housing anti-discrimination laws. Under Brian's leadership, HUD pursued large-scale, high-profile cases that addressed systemic discrimination and provided widespread relief. He also managed the department's Fair Housing Assistance Program and its Fair Housing Initiatives Program, which provided over $70 million to state and local government agencies and nonprofit organizations fighting discrimination in our local communities. His degree is in government from Harvard University. Mr. Claiborne was appointed as the Regional Administrator for HUD just last year by President Biden and is responsible for the oversight of the Secretary's initiatives and strategies, which support the overarching department priorities to increase equity and to improve customer experience. Prior to that, he served as counsel to the Missouri Housing Development Commission, the state's housing finance agency. As managing member of Claiborne & Associates, a law firm in Kansas City, Deke, as he's known by his colleagues and friends, has more than 25 years of experience in real estate law. He has also served as chair of the Real Estate and Probate Law section of the National Bar Association and the American Bar Association's Real Property Trust and Estate Law section, among many other volunteer roles. Mr. Claiborne was raised in St. Louis and has degrees from DePauw University, the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and Washington University in St. Louis. We so appreciate both Brian and Deke taking time to be with us today, as the important work they do at the federal and regional levels have a direct impact on us as realtors and the people whom we serve. Thank you both for being here, and with that, I will turn the time over to you.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you, Michelle. Thanks for your leadership as well. And thanks for reminding me how old I am with all of that biography. You know, they asked me to interview, is it all right if I call you Deke?
Absolutely.
I know it's in colleagues and friends, so maybe I can be included in that category for today. Special dispensation today?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think they asked me to interview Deke because of my many years working at HUD, and you know, I know where the skeletons are buried, so I think they think I'm going to ask you some really tough questions. But there's a lot going on in the time since I've left there, and we're here today celebrating Fair Housing Month. In fact, yesterday marked the 55th anniversary of the signing of the Fair Housing Act, signed in 1968. And so, I think it's an appropriate time to reflect on, you know, where we are in a country and realizing the promise of the Fair Housing Act. One of the areas that I know that President Biden and Secretary Marcia Fudge have emphasized is that 55 years since the passage of the Fair Housing Act, we still have these significant gaps in home ownership by racial groups, right? So the national home ownership rate is about 65%, But when you break that down demographically, the white homeownership rate is about 73, almost 74%, I believe. The Asian homeownership rate is in the 60s, the low 60s. The Hispanic homeownership rate trending upwards, but still in about 51%. And the African American homeownership rate at about 44%. And many people point out that that gap, particularly between the African American homeownership rate and the white homeownership rate, is almost as large or maybe larger than it was in 1968 and appears to be widening. So I guess the first big question here on Fair Housing Month is, why do you think that is? Why in 2023, one, do we have these gaps, these large gaps between all these groups, and why may it be getting bigger?
Well, it's a great question. I think that, let's say, and it was great that we're here in Missouri. And I think about being from St. Louis and thinking about the case of Shelley versus Kramer, 1948, which outlawed racial restricted covenants on properties. But, you know, the passage of a law does not change the mindsets that created the need for racial restricted covenants. So these things take time to eradicate, you know. Mm-hmm. But, and so you look at what occurs, yeah, it's 55 years since the passage of the Fair Housing Act. But you also have to look at what's occurred since then. I look at the whole idea of HUD counseling agencies and the money that's been directed into that to the counseling agencies so that they can better advise individuals as far as the home ownership process. Mm-hmm. I think about the funds that have been directed by this, not only this administration, but other administrations, to create special purpose credit programs you think about what has been placed in that queue that has not been a situation where nothing has been done mm-hmm. since the passage of the Fair Housing Act. So I look at it in a way that my being here just is additional opportunity, your being here mm-hmm. to talk about these important issues, and the audience being here to listen and to also contribute to how do we advance the whole idea of home ownership for everyone in mm-hmm. the country. So yes, you would look at it in a situation where, yeah, a lot of time has been passed, but it's not been passed doing nothing. It's been passed continuing to address the issue and continue to create opportunity.
So I know that HUD is the leader of this thing called the Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity, yes. which you all were thoughtful enough to make into a handy acronym, PAVE.
Yes.
All right. And that's looking at differences in appraisal value in different communities with a focus on whether there's either racial discrimination or racial disparities in it. I mean, I know one thing that, you know, we, the realtors observe is, you know, it's in that 55 years we're talking about, even for people of color who have attained home ownership, if you attain home ownership in some communities, it doesn't necessarily carry the same home value as in other communities. Sometimes legitimately, but this PAVE task force is looking at whether or not some of this devaluation may be a problem. Can you speak more on PAVE? I know it's an interagency task force, but can you tell us, you know, about HUD's leadership on that and how you all are looking at these issues and what you intend to do?
Yes. Well, the whole purpose is to try to trying to establish fairness. Mm-hmm. I think that's what everyone in the country wants. I think everybody wants to be treated fairly. And this PAVE had really two goals. One, first of all, to look in to determine the extent and consequences of appraisal bias, and then to come up with a set of recommendations as far as how to address it. And it came up with a number of recommendations, strengthening strengthening laws against discrimination, and enhancing the fair housing and fair lending enforcement, and building accountability in the industry, to build a well-trained and diverse appraisal workforce, to empower consumers to take action.
And it's not very diverse currently.
Well, not very diverse currently. I think that the appraisal industry is like 93% white male. And so we have to there's some work there. But the only way we're going to change that, as I said earlier, we can't change everything in an instant, but we're going to have to engage with the industry. In September of last year, I spoke with the Missouri Appraisal Advisory Council, and it was a very interesting engagement to talk about what is the issue. Why are we having these disparities? Everyone has seen these, some people say anecdotal situations where a person has, in one instance, a couple was selling their home. They had an appraiser come out. The property was appraised for a certain amount. They decided to take down all evidence that they were black in their home, ask a friend to come in and sit as a substitute for them, a white friend, and another appraiser comes out and appraises the house, and the value goes up $500,000. That's an extreme case, I think, but we have cases where we are HUD utilizing its entity, the FHA, and also utilizing Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and taking that data and getting a better idea of what is the extent of this appraisal bias. And since I'm talking to realtors, I'm wondering whether you in doing your jobs and representing buyers and sellers, do you find an instance that if I could,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Those instances where
we can do a survey here?
Where do you no, I guess we can't do that, but it's just the idea of when we're out there doing our jobs, do we encounter this? Do we see this? What is the responsibility and the role of individuals that, as a representative of a buyer, I would think it might be difficult to see, do you run into an instance where you see an appraisal that seems to be an outlier from what would normally be the appraisals, the values in a certain area? And then, say for instance, you're representing a buyer, and the appraisal on the seller's property comes back at maybe substantially lower. Well, what is my obligation as the broker for the buyer? And I think that in doing my job, there's no really need for me to speak up because the seller is represented, hopefully, and maybe I can get this transaction closed and provide equity. Instant equity to my client. But just interesting to I just want to throw that out there.
Right.
But yeah,
and we do hear from many members who say that they've seen something like this.
Yeah, and so what we're trying to do is what Secretary Fudge wants us to do is to engage with the industry and let's work together to try to figure out how do we address this problem. And you've seen the mortgagee letter that has gone out that provides an opportunity for reconsideration of value, really, but from the buyer's perspective, from the lender's perspective. So,
yeah.
So it may be, but that's what PAVE is. PAVE is an initiative, all of government approach to addressing this issue. and trying to find a way to engage with the industry to come up with solutions.
Yeah, well, we certainly eagerly await what some of the solutions are that come forward. I know that HUD's received a lot of complaints as well from individuals
Yes.
because the issue's gotten a lot of media attention. I'd say in the last 2 to 3 years, it's really like every 3 months I've seen a newspaper story. And I just, having worked at HUD for a while, and I remember when I first started seeing the stories, I'm like, oh, this is going to become a big issue. And among our appraisers, we began to say, all right, this is going to attract government attention, just because the stories all sort of took on a similar form, all over, from different places all over the country.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is consumers who've been rather sophisticated about it and doing essentially testing, their own tests.
Yeah.
And in some situations, I've seen like maybe 3 cases now involving biracial couples where when one member of the household is home,
Interesting.
they do the appraisal and there's a certain figure, and then they reorder the appraisal and the other member of the household is home. And often and I would say often because I've now seen like 3 stories with similar fact patterns, it'll come back like 30 to 50% higher.
Right.
And so, it's distressing to see these stories. So I'm hoping we see some federal government action soon, because also appraisers aren't entirely sure how to address it because
Yes.
there isn't much in the way of case law around
Yes.
this.
Right.
So that's something that I think realtors are really, really eager to see more
And
of.
then as your work in Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, we are, my work has been spent, most of my life has been spent as an attorney representing developers and individuals engaged in real estate development. So, and what we want and what you want is transactions that are successful.
Right.
And we don't really need an appraisal that is going to create a problem, where the seller decides, I'm not going to give my property away, and the transaction breaks down. So it's really a benefit to everyone to try to figure out what's the extent of this issue and how do we fix it.
So speaking of transactions, I would say probably everyone who's here in this room would say that when they engage in a transaction, they treat everyone fairly. Mm-hmm. Everyone's required to do fair housing training, and we've got some more innovative training we've provided that's available now. But then we have a code of ethics that prohibits discrimination. But then state and local and federal laws, which everyone's been trained on. Mm-hmm. So if you were to ask almost any individual here, they would say, well, they don't engage in this. And so I'm kind of interested to hear your perspective. If we don't see us as the problem, and you can tell us if we are, if we're not the problem, what really is the big problem today when it comes to discrimination in housing sales? And if that's not really so much the issue today, these gaps, how can real estate professionals who care about these gaps, how can they be part of the solution? What can real estate professionals do if they feel, well, they're doing everything individually already that they're supposed to do?
Yeah, well, the thing is that we're saying that, when you say that we're all working and treating everyone fairly, and I think the one thing that we try to advise that if you see something, say something, but that gets you back to what is my role, and I'm in my role as a broker, but am I required then to go to the lender and say that I see something out here that really could be problematic or at least odd? Mm-hmm. Is that my responsibility? When you get beyond that, the other thing is that we would ask is we're looking at this whole idea of trying to guide people, right? Guide them.
Like steering?
Yeah, into the whole idea of, housing counseling. to make sure that people understand the resources that are available to them. And also understanding the resources that are available with respect to filing a claim with FHNEO, Fair Housing Equal Opportunity, in the event that you do see something. But I look at one of the things that's sort of really great and gives me really, we understand, we can see that we can make a difference in the home ownership rate with respect to housing counseling, making sure people understand what is available, what is affordable, how do you identify a lender, what is appropriate, what are the other programs that are available, like first-time home buyers, the down payment assistance, So those are things that can be done to help in this way and help individuals be guided where they can acquire a home and obtain the benefits of home ownership.
Well, along those lines, a priority for NAR has been to promote more housing supply and more housing that's affordable to the typical buyer. Just this week, I saw John Oliver, the comedian John Oliver. He had a show on, I think the show's called Last Week Tonight. He had a show on homeowners associations and the power of homeowners associations. And at the very beginning, he said, oh, and by the way, if you're under 35, this show's not for you because you'll never own a home. He's a comedian, bit of a shock comedian. But it taps into a real concern among young people that it's challenging to own a home, to buy a home today. People of all backgrounds to buy a starter home. So I'm interested to hear what HUD, what the federal government more broadly is doing to deal with the affordability issue and the supply issue.
The supply issue is, something that we're working with. Like, you got to work with. HUD is not building homes, of course, but HUD is a gigantic insurance company that basically finances its FHA-insured lenders, and so. But in saying that, we want to encourage, with respect to FHA, this whole 30 basis point reduction in the mortgage insurance premium that will save on average the home buyer $800 annually. We want to make sure that individuals they're aware of what we call trying to educate people with respect to what we call myth busters. Misinformation that's out there that I have to have 20% in order for a down payment. Well, that's wrong. It's 3.5% for FHA mortgage. That I can't. I had bad credit. You have to have perfect credit in order to buy a home. No, you really don't. FHA will work with you, and especially in light of working with, again, housing counselors in order to be able to address debt and also financial literacy and understanding the process. There are some folks that say, I found a fixer-upper and I really am sure I can't get a loan for that. Well, yes, you can under 203K loan program, which will not only finance the purchase, but also the rehab. And we're trying to make sure that we provide additional information to young folks. A young person says, I got student loan debt, and I understand that that's going to stop me from being able to purchase. Well, FHA has tweaked its underwriting so that kids, what was a person with student loan debt, that only the actual monthly payment would be considered in the underwriting rather than previously where it had been a certain percentage of the overall debt. So those kinds of things we're doing to try to make the process better so that people have a better opportunity to acquire a home, because this is very important for everyone. We need more housing, not just affordable housing, but we need more single-family housing, multifamily. We need more single detached. We need more modular, manufactured housing. We need housing in all of its varieties, so that everyone that has an opportunity, that has prepared themselves for home ownership, that they can acquire a home.
Yeah, and I was driving, because I do this, I was driving through some areas of St. Louis today, and just their whole swath goes for miles of just abandoned,
Vacant lots.
Yeah, but also just vacant, boarded up homes.
Yes.
How is HUD engaging on efforts to preserve housing and to rehabilitate housing? I know we at the National Association of Realtors are strong supporters of the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which would use tax credits to help bring up, basically to invest money into these homes for rehabilitation so that they can be viable, on the market to sell. But like, where is HUD in the mix of efforts to preserve existing housing stock? Because we do have some housing that, with some TLC, we could perhaps get on the market again.
Well, I think that HUD's programs, whether it's we're talking about our 221, a D4, more and more multifamily programs, or just FHA insurance, which is for not just for affordable housing. That's interesting. Some people think that FHA insurance only applies to affordable housing, and it's interesting that we're not in Kansas City, and if you're there, or in St. Louis at Baseball Village, right where in the shadow of Cardinal Station, that housing is financed by FHA. So now, with respect to those homes in certain areas, and being from St. Louis, I definitely understand. When I'm there, I'm driving around, taking a look at it, and it really needs some, definitely you say TLC. But you look at, you take a 203K loan and you find a property that needs some help. There is a program that works for you, to be able to acquire that home, rehabilitate it, and get it back in the housing stock. We understand one thing at HUD: we cannot do it all by ourselves.
No.
So we are engaged. One of the things I wanted to do when I first got the position, I wanted to meet with individuals that are working on different housing models, and worked with we went and visited some folks in Kansas City and throughout the state, looking at different models that are working. And but one of the interesting is the community land trusts, and this whole idea of a nonprofit retaining the ownership of the land in order to reduce taxes, and then the property being built on top of it, and enter into an arrangement with a first-time home buyer in order to acquire the property at a lower price, and then understanding that upon resale, you will not, a portion of that gain would be retained by this nonprofit in order to make sure that the property is available at a moderate price, at a reasonable price for the next company. Those kinds of ideas that are out here in the state and throughout the country, we are working with individuals in order to try to advance those.
That's good.
We look at the whole idea of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, but we got to work with local governments with respect to their zoning and issues. So it is not easy. I guess that's what I'm saying. But HUD is out there looking at, we're working with all of our partners trying to make sure that we can solve this problem. And because it's important, every person needs a home. That's where everything starts.
And the ADUs offer some great opportunities for multi-generational housing as well. And all of those things I think are necessary, and it's great to see these partnerships sort of cobbling together opportunities to build the housing stock. Still, when you see what I see out there, you really still feel like there ought to be almost like a Marshall Plan to address this, because it's just miles and miles in some places.
But I think I was in Omaha, Nebraska. There's a project there called Highlander, and it's a choice neighborhoods project, which means it's not only housing, but it's neighborhoods, it's people. And this whole idea of, it's a beautiful project, and this is the beautiful part, because it's a mixed income development. And what's so beautiful about it is that they have a waiting list for this project for the market rate units. This was an area of disinvestment, but now people that can, whatever you make, who can live anywhere, are looking to move back to this area. And it's aspirational. These are the things that we are doing. We just need to replicate them and have those kinds of projects. We have a choice neighborhoods in St. Louis. We have choice neighborhoods in Kansas City. We have a choice neighborhoods. These tend to be larger projects. But I've seen, we were in Rock Island, Illinois, and working with our partners in Region 5. And just the whole idea of infill and whatever is needed, whatever is the model that works, that's what we should be doing. That's what we are doing.
And certainly, at the Realtors, I tend to look at things through the lens of home ownership and single-family housing opportunities. Let's talk a little bit more about rental.
Yes.
Everywhere, every metropolitan area, not even really throughout, we're in the middle of the country, and I think particularly in the middle of the country, people are finding that they can't afford their rent.
Yes.
HUD has the Housing Choice Voucher Program.
Yes.
Unlike other programs that are intended to help people of lesser means, not everyone gets it. So if you need food stamps in this country, you get it. But when it comes to housing, shelter over your head, long waiting lists, and people struggle.
Yes.
So are there any efforts underway, one, to make housing choice vouchers more widely available? And then maybe I'll ask this too, is there any effort to make the program more appealing to housing providers too, so they're more inclined to rent to people with vouchers?
That is a great question. Two things. I think we need more voices in this whole idea of saying that vouchers work. It's one thing for HUD to say it, but what we've done is we've traveled to meet with the chambers of commerce in different cities, to talk to them, to advise them, to ask their members who are owners of market rate apartment developments to utilize the program. And they have, and we have to address the concerns that they might have, that they feel that voucher holders are somewhat innately more destructive than market rate renters. But we've had loss mitigation accounts that have been set up by different housing PHAs, public housing authorities. And that says that, Mr. Landlord, to the extent that someone comes in and destroys your property that's a voucher holder, you can access this account and receive funds and fix your property. And we've stood these up in different places, these accounts, and there's not been one claim filed against it. We're establishing the evidence that voucher holders are not more destructive than market rate renters, and so therefore addressing the myths and busting those in order to now ask landlords to be a participant. Because if we can get 30 landlords to provide just 2 units and accept just 2 voucher holders, then that's the equivalent of developing a 60-unit housing development without going through the process, first of all, finding the financing or dealing with any local government or anything, or NIMBYism or anything else. So this is something that we're doing.
And you mentioned multifamily developments. Are there, because we have a housing shortage of all kinds, including rental housing.
Yes.
Are there more efforts to boost the supply of multifamily housing out there?
Absolutely. We're working every day to do that.
Yeah.
But we look at, with respect to our programs, you know, the low-income housing tax credit program is not ours. So it's really guided by Section 42. But you see the additional credits that are provided now. I think Missouri is going to allocate, MHTC is going to allocate not only this year's, but a portion of another year, so that 1.5 times that they did their allocation from last year. Well, last year was 1.5 times also. But we're providing more and more funds to multifamily development in order to try to create, also working to find a way to have manufactured homes so that those can be financed better. So some lenders are a little reticent about financing multifamily housing because they think about the idea that is it really chattel or is it really a property? We are working through those, and so it is an ongoing battle, but it's one that I think we're really making some progress on. You know,
pulling every lever there.
Yes.
So saw an interesting story recently, getting back to sort of the fair housing theme, that the typical American thinks that when it comes to wealth in this country, that people of color and whites are very close. And it kind of surprised me. But for example, this particular study said that Americans of all backgrounds think that African Americans have maybe 90 cents to every white American's dollar, when the reality is it's like 12 cents to every white American's dollar. And when I look at the data on home ownership, we see that. So we do a report called the Snapshot on Home Ownership, on buyers and sellers by race. And just a couple of months ago, we put one out. And this is like people who have succeeded in buying homes. And what we found was that for white Americans, twice as many were able to find their down payment through the sale of a previous home compared to African Americans. And then when it came to down payment, African Americans were 3 times as likely to dip into their retirement or their pension than white Americans in order to find the money for the down payment. And also the educational levels of African Americans who were successful in buying homes was significantly higher than the typical white home buyer. So you're seeing these folks who are doing presumably everything you should do to, you know, attain an income to afford the homes at these prices, but they're having to, you know, they don't have the generational wealth from prior home ownership. They probably did not, in lesser amounts, had parents who could send them to schools, or they're also, you know, going to student loan debt. All these different things. I sometimes think of it almost as like a patient where all the systems are, you're trying to hold it all together. What can the federal government do to acknowledge that these long-term issues are exacerbating the home ownership gap? Because it's getting larger, even despite, you know, people having these higher educational levels and the like. Is there, you mentioned special purpose credit programs.
Yes.
You know, are there things that the government can do that acknowledge that history?
Well, I think some of these things are being stood up by lenders at these special purpose credit programs. And Secretary Marcia Fudge, has, speaking for HUD, has stated that these programs that are initiated by for-profit, non-profit to create avenues for home ownership to individuals or disadvantaged persons, that those are not violative of the Fair Housing Act. And so that, you know, the question and the reticence that some lenders had in order to advancing these has now been taken away. There's the fear that something could be, they could find themselves in litigation as a result of it.
Right.
That's been addressed. we've got to get better advice and the news out to individuals that what is being done, and also continue to address the myths that are there that cause people to despair and think that there's no opportunity. There is some, and we just have to make sure that people are aware of it and continue to advance that news. And nothing beats success like success.
Right.
We've gone to the Housing Authority, Kansas City Housing Authority, and we visit every housing authority that we visit. We want to talk about Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which is a program, of course, with public housing. You only spend 30% of your monthly salary for rent. So say, for instance, you're paying $200 for your unit. And then you get a raise, and now you're making $900, so you pay $300. Well, that extra $100 goes into an account, and you stay, and you're receiving training and on debt reduction and literacy programs, and also education. And so, anything above that $200 goes into this account, and in 5 years, you get access to that account in order for down payment assistance for a home, education, further education, a car, start a business. And so that we're moving people to self-sufficiency. We want to make sure people understand that just because you're born in public housing doesn't mean you're required to die in public housing. You can then advance as far as you can go, and our job is to try to promote self-sufficiency.
Great. Well, I think we have 20 seconds left. Any final words on what realtors can do? I mean, again, I mentioned, realtors feel they're doing their part. Is there more as citizens or as people who care about these issues we can do to join forces with what you do at HUD? Well,
I just appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak, and definitely be interested. Like I said, we're going to be speaking with all of the regulatory bodies of appraisers throughout the region. Our job is, but if you see something, I know you have certain restrictions, but if you see something, say something. So,
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you all so much for attending our Emerging Issues Forum. Thank you both, Deke. Thank you, Brian. There's a quote Maya Angelou says, "When you know better, you do better." And so I think that these two gentlemen really helped us gain perspective on the racial wealth gap. So I'm very grateful to both of you for sharing all of this information. And as an organization, as individuals, we will do better. Next up is the candidate forum. So I encourage you all to hang out. We have candidates that are going to be joining us up on stage, and you will hear more about who they are, what they believe, and we'll see you back in just a few minutes. Thank you so much.